Well, this week I'm going to start a little series on Chopin. Not quite as extensive as my Debussy series. Chopin, of course, plays a very important role in the piano literature, the history, the development. He wrote all kinds of genres, the scherzo, the ballade, the sonata, polonaise, the mazurka, the etude, the prelude. Those are the main ones I can think of right now anyway. And he did amazing things with all of them. And one thing that impressed me is how I think Paris plays more of a role than a lot of people give it credit for. People go on about how Chopin's heart was always in Poland. Well, of course, now it literally is in Poland. Most of his body is in the cemetery in Paris, but in Père Lachaise. But they actually moved his heart to Poland, as a symbolic gesture. But I think that medieval Paris and the cultural milieu of Paris, Paris was, most of the 19th century, Paris was kind of a cultural center, if not the cultural center in Europe. You could argue there were others. But when he arrived, in 1831, so much was going on. He was a young man, and he was very impressionable. And this was before, of course, Haussmann had destroyed Paris by making the Grand Boulevard, the 6 to 8 story buildings that look somewhat elegant, that are widely spaced on these boulevards, This didn't exist in Chopin's time. You had the old medieval streets and the buildings and these corners, and you would turn the corner and we were in another world. In some cases the passages were only a few feet wide. You had to pass someone. It wasn't the easiest thing. So there was a very different, probably claustrophobic. Of course, all the garbage was coming out of the windows too, which wasn't so nice particularly. But for Chopin, who was around 20 at the time, it must have been very, very strong impression for him. It's interesting too. A year ago, before the pandemic, I went to Paris because I want to work on another film, this time about Chopin, and so I documented various locations in Paris where he had lived and where he had been, including, the arch where he entered. And because it's crazy, he rode a stagecoach from Strasbourg. Now, I've taken this train from Paris through Strasbourg to Basel and Zurich many times, and now it's a 3.5 to 4 hour affair. Well, it was 70 hours. Can you imagine 70 hours on a stagecoach? He'd originally intended to go to Italy, but he couldn't. There was too much unrest. Things were unsettled in Italy, apparently, in the fall of 1831. So he went to Paris instead, and he later joked that his passport said in transit through Paris on the way to London. So he would joke about this later in life, that he was just a passing person in Paris, although he remained there. He traveled, but he remained there until his death in 1849. So, in this scene, you can see the house where he wrote so many of his later works in this courtyard. Beautiful place that he shared with Georges Sand for part of it, for 1842 to 1847. But when he first arrived, he came to this tiny little place at Boulevard Poissonnerie. Poisson is fish. He was really happy. He wrote, "You wouldn't believe how nice I'm living. I have a small room beautifully furnished in mahogany with a porch on the boulevard from which I can see from Montmartre to the Panthéon and along the entire beautiful world. Many will be jealous of my view, but no one of my stairs." So he had quite the introduction to Paris. And we'll be talking more about that and linking some of the locations with some of the pieces. But I want to give a brief discussion, some of the pieces as well. We have, there are different currents. There's the heroic current that we get in some of the polonaises, the somewhat pseudo-military thing. And even in the second scherzo, this somewhat virtuosic grand, big gesture. Chopin was considered to be very frail. He wasn't so strong. He really would only perform once a year in Salle Pleyel when he was established in Paris. He just didn't. Liszt, of course, it's been written that he and Liszt were arch rivals and that Chopin was competing, and so he wrote some pieces specifically to counter the virtuosity that Liszt did. So this is one side of him, but there's also a far more intimate side, one that came across, I think, in the mazurkas, which is where he did some of his grandest experiments and some of his best works, some of the most special things that he did. And so, I think there's this very strong strain of chromaticism. Chords added, we call them applied chords that don't belong to the key, that add intensification, that sometimes modulate. And I actually would go so far as to say that medieval Paris that he knew and life in Paris are partly responsible for that. Now, of course, maybe his longing for Poland was also part of that. Maybe his soul, his spirit were responsible for that. But it's interesting, in this mazurka, Opus 24, number 4, interesting how he does it. Now, a mazurka, of course, refers in general to a sort of a Polish dance. There could be different kinds of Polish dances, and in fact, I've had a student who was able to identify the dances in different mazurkas, because he was from Poland. He was an older man from Poland, and he could say, oh, well, this is this dance, and oh, well, this is this dance. Now, I can't tell you what dance this is, but isn't it interesting? It starts in 3/4. We start with a pickup, an onbeat, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then it becomes offbeat, so there's a tension already, but we start with an octave. We really don't know what key we're in. Are we in F? Are we in B flat? Are we in something else? Go to the 7th, that's pretty dissonant. Well, not only do we go down chromatically in the top, we come up chromatically in the bottom. We get smaller and smaller tritone, which then becomes a 4th. So in fact, we're in B flat minor, and the key signature might suggest that. But if you hear this, we're coming from another land. We don't know where we are. Then it starts to sound like, the Chopin that we know. But these are some of the mazurkas are incredible. In fact, I may end up exploring more of them because of the things that they do that are so interesting. But, we have a piece that most students play, one of the first ballade. Beautiful piece. I was luckily able to hear Pollini play it as an encore. He played a not very good Chopin E minor concerto. He was supposed to have played with Abato, but it had been canceled because Abato had died. And so clearly he was shaken. But when he played that ballade, it just came into this amazing, sharp focus. But this piece, we may talk a bit about the ballade and the form a bit and how it works and the different themes that he has there. As well as some of the etudes, perhaps. How to work on how we practice this. Or even the revolutionary. So I will try to be brief. Look forward to working on this over the next few weeks. And we'll have another Chopin presentation next week. Take care.